Hi everyone and welcome back to the George Collection. I'm Rachel Rightside Blonde. For today's episode, I wanted to take a look at Donald Trump's inauguration speech about how he said he was going to take power away from the politicians and give it back to the people. And I wanted to see how that fit into a couple different George covers. The first one was from July of 1998, and it says, "Armageddon, how the government is planning your destruction." Sounds familiar to what Trump was talking about in his speech, where for too many years, the politicians have made all this money and kept all their power while the people suffered.
Today's ceremony, however, has very special meaning, because today we are not merely transferring power from one administration to another or from one party to another, but we are transferring power from Washington, D.C. and giving it back to you, the people. For too long, a small group in our nation's capital has reaped the rewards of government while the people have borne the cost. Washington flourished, but the people did not share in its wealth. Politicians prospered, but the jobs left and the factories closed. The establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. And while they celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little to celebrate for struggling families all across our land. That all changes starting right here and right now, because this moment is your moment. It belongs to you. It belongs to everyone gathered here today and everyone watching all across America. This is your day, this is your celebration, and this, the United States of America, is your country.
The second cover that I wanted to go through was December of 1998. And the title at the very top of it says, "The Top 10 Ways to Get Power in Washington." It's no secret that John Kennedy Jr. knew some things and maybe was using George as a mouthpiece for some of the things he knew. And I feel like this was another one of those things that he was trying to warn us about. The government's planning your destruction, and Washington is all about power, and here's the way they get power in that city. So let's take a look at the two different articles and the two different issues of George that came out in 1998. In the first issue about how the government is planning our destruction, the article says, "Experts say the U.S. is likely to be attacked by terrorists using biological or chemical weapons, and the government has chosen which citizens it wants to protect." And it says, "Who will survive?" This entire article is about biological threats and how there's not enough adequate training. It says one member of Congress says the domestic preparedness program, at best, it's uneven. At worst, only a handful of cities are getting adequate training. Another part of the article says many experts in and outside the government echo this view. They say that the United States has spent the last 3 years preparing for tragedies that have already occurred, the World Trade Center, Oklahoma City, Tokyo, and has been slow to recognize the potentially greater peril of a deliberately set epidemic of diseases like smallpox. It's a very interesting article, and the gist of it is the United States government is not prepared for this kind of a threat. And I think it's very interesting that the cover of it says how the government is planning your destruction, and they're talking about a bioweapon inside of this magazine. Very interesting. The next cover I wanted to highlight was the December 1998 cover that says the top 10 ways to get power in Washington. So let's take a look at that. So not shockingly, there are some ways to get power that weren't mentioned in this article, but here is what it says. Expand your network, be a know-it-all, get a buzz on, work the phones, use the beeper, stick close to power. This one says proximity increases opportunity, so fight for an office near the influence center. Former Nixon aide Daniel Patrick Moynihan maneuvered for an office in the White House even though it was in the basement. It meant I could piss standing next to Haldeman, he explained. Pucker up. As you move up the ladder, make pleasing your boss a priority. Anticipate his or her needs. Write a memo, offer options, arrange an interview. Invent needs your boss isn't even aware of, then satisfy them. You weren't on the distribution list, you say, but I made sure you got the report. Stomp the competition. Crawl up the ladder on the rungs of other people. But that's dangerous, cautions negotiation expert Herb Cohen. If you bring someone down and people know it, they won't trust you. Who wants Linda Tripp working for them? Next, hone your memory. Follow Bill Clinton's example. Remember names and personal details. By appearing to recall hometowns, children's ages, hobbies, and recent triumphs, you show acquaintances that they're important to you. Of course, you don't really have to remember. Just have a secretary with a filing system keep track of all of these details. And last, just do it. Achieve power by doing what you set out to do and doing it well. Both of these issues of George mesh well with what Donald Trump said in his inaugural speech about the government trying to take over and plan our destruction, and also that they have all the power in Washington. So, was George aware of this? Was John Kennedy Jr. trying to tell us something with his magazine? I think that answer is yes, and I think this is even more proof that that is the case. That does it for this episode of the George Collection. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great week, and I will see you next time.
George, which is a hoot of a magazine. I thought you were a lawyer.
I was.
What happened?
Well, we decided, actually taking a cue from folks like yourself and you around the 1992 election, that there was an opportunity here to change the definition of a political magazine. Certainly the way Americans were accessing information about politics and politicians was changing. Candidates were appearing on late-night talk shows, on talk radio, on sitcoms, and there was a kind of a leveling process, and while the rest of media clearly had caught up with that, we felt that political magazines per se hadn't.
Your mother was a hell of an editor at Doubleday.
That's what I hear.
Would she have liked George?
I think she would have.